Amanda, can you also make sure that yours is also recording from your end? Perfect. And now I'm going to make you the host. Amanda. Amazing. Good work, everyone.
Hit start webinar, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first session of Women in Crypto presented by Chainalysis. I'm Amanda Wick, and I'm the Chief of Legal Affairs at Chainalysis. And I'd like to introduce you to the three fabulous, brilliant women who are joining me today. Catherine Bradbury is a Senior Sanctions Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, also called OFAC. She has also served as a Defense and Foreign Policy Advisor in the U.S. Senate and worked for the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Carol House is a Senior Cyber and Emerging Technology Policy Officer at the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. She is a former Army captain who served in chemical defense and military intelligence, and she served as a Presidential Management Fellow supporting the White House Office of Management and Budget, Cyber and National Security Unit, and the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. And Michelle Korver is the Department of Justice's first digital currency counsel. She has more than 25 years of law enforcement and federal trial experience. She previously served as an Assistant United States Attorney, a financial investigator with the United States Secret Service, and a law clerk to a United States District Court judge in the Southern District of Florida. We also want to introduce Chainalysis to you if you don't know us. We are the blockchain analysis. We provide data, software, services, and research to government agencies, exchanges, financial institutions, and insurance and cybersecurity companies in over 50 countries. Our data platform powers investigation, compliance, and risk management tools that have been used to solve some of the world's most high-profile cyber criminal cases and grow consumer access to cryptocurrency safely. We are going to save time for a brief question and answer session at the end, but please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A portion during our discussion, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. Also, please note that all of the views expressed by the speakers are their own, and they do not necessarily represent the views of their respective agencies. And finally, they cannot answer questions regarding pending investigations, enforcement actions, or the of ongoing regulatory rulemaking. So if your question isn't addressed at the end, that may be the reason. So I would love to just jump in. I'm so excited to see you all. And personal background questions for fun. Let's just start with what got you into crypto. How long have you been in the space, and what's your earliest crypto memory? Catherine, let's start with you.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. So I would say I got into crypto, it was only after I got to OFAC and was interested in seeing what some of the other portfolios outside of my assignments were. And I became really interested in taking on the virtual currency portfolio because it is so different and emerging compared to some of OFAC's more traditional focuses. So I have been working the virtual currency portfolio for about a year now, and I'm looking forward to getting more exposure to it over time.
All right, Michelle, let's go to you next.
So I started working on cryptocurrency matters back in the summer of 2013 when I was a federal prosecutor out in Denver. And it was interesting. I had seen virtual currency before used in the context of money laundering as a criminal prosecutor, having gone to a training where they talked about Second Life and the use of Linden dollars. And I thought that was very fascinating. And so when the agent walked into my office one day and started talking about darknet markets and drug traffickers and money laundering involving Bitcoin, I was immediately hooked. And so that's how I actually got my start working in the crypto world on the dark side of things.
I'm laughing because mine was this, I think that's exactly when we met, like same incident, same time, but I think Carol may beat us all, don't you?
I don't know. So, well, what got me into crypto was actually cyber. And yeah, I've had kind of a hard cyber and tech exploitation background and nexus with my career since like about a decade ago in the Army as an intelligence officer, but really started to look at blockchain and like hard crypto probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And especially when I first came over to FinCEN, it was great. So looking at, you know, blockchain as one word, sort of being like soft cipher blockchaining as a type of encryption combined with distributed computing, and you get blockchain as one word, sort of like, oh, that's pretty cool. So like from a very nerdy perspective, that was kind of my earliest memory of thinking like, oh, that's what this is. Okay, that's how that works.
So I think something that would be helpful is if each of you could just talk about your role, but then also kind of like the role that your agency plays in the space, because we hear so much about DOJ, OFAC, and FinCEN, but like kind of tell us like, where do you sit, what do you do, and specifically like your place in it. This time we'll start with Carol.
Great. Yeah, so I'll start actually with FinCEN and what they do, because so when I was in the Army, I was a collection manager, and what that means is you control all the assets that like watch and listen to people and kind of direct the intelligence collection. And I think FinCEN kind of serves this really interesting function as sort of an intelligence collection manager, because through regulation, as the administrator of the Bank Secrecy Act, we issue these regulations for financial institutions to collect and keep records of all this really critical information that law enforcement and FinCEN and other national security authorities can use to detect money laundering and terrorism financing activities. So that's the role of FinCEN in this space. And then, of course, in the role of virtual currency, that means that when there's financial activity involving these assets, that activity is covered because our framework is technology neutral. Me personally, I'm the lead for cyber and emerging technology policy issues. So I work a lot on cyber-enabled financial crime, things like virtual currency, regulatory and strategic policy, and then digital identity, which is a really interesting kind of triad of things together where some of them exacerbate the others and some of them can solve some of the problems for the others. So yeah, that's what I do over at FinCEN.
It occurs to me that starting with you, I should have said, what does FinCEN not do in crypto? And that probably would have been a shorter answer. So that's on me, not you. Okay, let's go. Catherine, how about you?
So I work for OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, and our mission is to administer and enforce economic and trade sanctions based on national security and foreign policy goals against threats to the country, be it our economy, national security, foreign policy. And so that includes targeting the illicit use of digital currency. And so within OFAC, which is about a 200-person office, I sit within our policy division, which is about a 10 to 15 person group, and I cover virtual currency, but I also cover cyber, election interference, Russia, and some of our smaller Eastern Europe portfolio. So there's no shortage of things to do these days. But OFAC policy in general, as said in the name, we focus on sanctions policy and coordinating across other parts of OFAC as well as with the interagency.
So I know both of you guys have enforcement divisions and the two of you sit in policy. Michelle, you play an interesting role doing both for DOJ, correct? Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So for me, I'm across a number of different functions within the same subject matter at the Department of Justice. I sit in the criminal division and specifically in the money laundering and asset recovery section. So my subject matter expertise related to cryptocurrency is prosecutions related to the financial transactions that might underlie any particular type of violation, and then seizure and recovery through our forfeiture statutes, whether it's forfeiture related to non-victim, where the law enforcement can take the assets from the criminal activity and then use it to fund enforcement needs, or whether we're recovering assets for victims in cases where there may be victims. And so in this capacity, I run the Digital Currency Initiative, and we do training, policy, consultation on cases, pretty much all of the different portfolios where there would be a need related to cryptocurrency in enforcing our criminal statutes across DOJ.
So I think the question that everybody would ask, let's just get it off the table, is What do you guys think the hot topics and priorities will be for your respective agencies in 2021? Before everybody asks, like, what's happening and what's hot for you guys? Let's start with Michelle this time.
So for us, it's hard to know because we are still in the transition of having our Attorney General confirmed and for the priorities to be rolled out once he and his staff is in place. So I think we're all excited to hear what their priorities at the Department of Justice will be. I think generally in the cryptocurrency space, we're less affected by the priorities that are rolled out because we see that cryptocurrency is a means of transferring or storing value across any of the violations that we are regularly involved in investigating and prosecuting. And so for us, although there might be, for example, in the last administration, the fentanyl and opioid epidemic was a very important priority of the Department of Justice. And so we saw a lot of funding and capacity related to darknet markets and fentanyl distributors, and obviously the cryptocurrency facilitation or money laundering that occurs with that. But it still remains to be seen what where the priorities will be for this next administration's Department of Justice. And I think we'll just continue as career professionals cranking along with looking at any of the cryptocurrency effects or facilitation related to our criminal violations.
And that's a really good point that was embedded in there that I think some people don't realize is that when it comes to criminal prosecutions, that's going to be all DOJ, and that FinCEN and OFAC are going to be civil enforcement actions, and those are very different. So there was like a nugget in there that I think people can really appreciate and benefit from. Carol, what about you? What's on the horizon for FinCEN? You had a very, very busy Christmas season. So what's happening in 2021?
I think a lot of people listening had a very busy time as well.
I say that with a smile, not because you ruined my Christmas Eve. No, I tease.
Deeply appreciate all the feedback from industry, and I deeply enjoyed reading about 1,000 of the 7,500 comments that we got on the NPRM. So there was a lot of feedback and a lot of voice there, and it was great. It was great to be on the receiving end. So I know we'll speak to it a little bit later, but implementing some of the really groundbreaking provisions from the AML Act of 2020 that was in the NDAA this year, that was a really significant piece of legislation that's going to be, I mean, it's going to change a lot of things, and it's going to drive a lot of really great efforts and even enhance ones that FinCEN already has underway. So there's really something for everybody on the AML side there. Obviously, the exploitation of emerging technologies, whether through virtual currency or cybercrime, is going to continue to be a priority for us. So, whether it's continuing efforts like through our rapid response program, which helps us to assist victims and law enforcement in recovering assets that were stolen via cybercrime, and which hit the $1 billion mark in recovered assets just last year, or combating unregistered MSB activity. That's also something that will continue to be a priority for us, as evident in like our enforcement actions that you spoke to just in October, the latest one against a virtual currency mixer. And then also to be able to continue disrupting these illicit networks, we'll continue our innovation initiative and efforts to engage with the sector and really better understand and dissect innovative threat typologies and emerging technology issues.
You hit on some really good things in there that we're definitely going to come back to. Catherine, what about you guys? I can already see in some of the Q&A that there's questions about OFAC and ransomware, and what do you guys think the hot topics and priorities will be for OFAC in 2021?
Sure. So I think I'd agree with Michelle that a lot of this will be dictated by the new administration, but some of the more bedrock focus points for us that I think will continue to be important to OFAC would be one, on the targeting front, we'll continue to target the illicit use of cryptocurrency to evade or circumvent sanctions, and that could be the use of digital currency by blocked persons and embargoed regions, as well as to facilitate sanctionable activity across the spectrum. And when we are looking at taking designation actions, we want to make sure that they're impactful And by impact, we mean we have the ability to deter or disrupt the malign activity. And so particularly with, I guess, malicious cyber actors, they have the ability to mask or cloak their behavior more easily than others might. And that could include changing digital currency addresses, modifying their identities, or other techniques to try to throw us off the trail. So when we take a designation, we try to make sure that we're also providing enough information to the public, and particularly the compliance community, so we can all help guard against the misuse of the virtual currency products and services that are out there. And then I think one other issue that will continue to be an interesting and challenging way forward for OFAC is it just adapting to the unique elements that digital currency has. And so, for instance, when we list identifiers on our sanctions list, when we designate persons, we want to make sure that we're including the right information and making it publicly available. And so in several of our recent actions related to the misuse of digital currency, we've been including those digital currency addresses with those we've targeted to make that blockchain attribution public. And so we hope by putting that type of information on our specially designated nationals and blocked persons list, which is the long version of the SDN list, which is our sanctions list, we hope that helps the private sector improve their ability to screen against these designated parties and prevent them from transacting in digital currency. And we also hope that there may be some possibilities that providing this information may create or make more evident links between things that might not have been as easily tied together without that public attribution. So we'll continue to look for ways to adapt to this unique environment.
Like Amanda froze on us.
I thought it might be me.
We'll give her a second to see if her internet comes back, and I'll ping her as well.
Yeah, I think we might know what the next question is. Do you want us to lead off? Oh, there she is.
There she is. We lost you.
Yeah, that would be great. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. Did I get caught in one of those horribly ugly faces? Because that happens to me all the time when I freeze. So that's like the only salvaging point. Thank God. No, I think the next question was basically regulation, like in terms of regulations or I think case related? Sorry, I completely lost my place.
Crypto cases, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of regulating or investigating crypto related cases, and actually I will tell you one of the Q&As that came in kind of touched on this, and Michelle, if you have like a second, one of the folks in risk and compliance asked about evidence needed to successfully prosecute a cryptocurrency related case, which I know we could spend like 3 hours on that topic, or you've done days on the knack on that alone. But just kind of like leading in terms of, like things that you guys find helpful in terms of that, or regulations you see on the horizon.
Right. There are a lot of different things that we clearly draw from a bunch of different sources in order to build our cases and have evidence in order to prove beyond a reasonable doubt a criminal violation. But really, it's all of that information that you're going to be collecting pursuant to the Bank Secrecy Act is the same type of information that's going to be helpful to us with proving our cases, particularly because a lot of these cases are either cyber enabled, cyber in nature, or even if there's nothing else cyber about them, they're somehow being connected on or conducted online, so that often we don't know at the beginning of the case who the perpetrators are, and we need to find attribution evidence, identify the people behind the computer. And so the information about their transactional activity, the KYC that you're doing, that is all really IP information, device information when people log in. That's all very useful information to us, if not completely for purposes of proving a case, at least, bits and pieces that may lead us as breadcrumbs on our investigation. Another thing that's actually really helpful is any communications that you have with folks that may be engaged in suspicious activity, that you may be doing follow-up discussions with in order to do your due diligence with your AML programs, whether it's notes that you take from conversations that you have with those individuals, or if there's email traffic about, hey, you know, we're seeing these types of transactions that didn't seem typical for the way you filled out your account holder application. Can you tell us, you know, what the nature of these transactions, et cetera? Sometimes the responses that they will give is going to be very, very useful information for us in money laundering prosecutions, for example. So just every bit and piece as far as information you would normally collect in the BSA, and then any interactions that you may need to have with the customers while you're doing your compliance duties.
And Carol, what about you guys in terms of, I mean, I know you've probably got a lot percolating, but in terms of, you know, how your agency is regulating crypto, I know you've got the NPRM kind of on hold, but do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's fair to say that FinCEN is and probably will still remain on the forefront of regulation and investigation in crypto, and will continue to leverage a technology neutral approach in that regulatory and enforcement framework, specifically by trying to examine really the nature of the activities that are happening and trying to determine where controls must be put in place to handle those unmitigated money laundering and terrorism financing risks. And one of those is by continuing to consider the incredible feedback that I mentioned before that we've received from industry on our latest NPRMs. And in fact, there's some great news. Even like today was when the Federal Register officially published what we announced 2 days ago, which was an official extension for 60 days for notice and comment on the latest rule related to wallet transactions. So we're hoping that industry will continue to offer feedback. You've got 60 days, and I think that's March 29th. So please continue to give us feedback, especially technical feedback that really helps walk us through like specific things, the way that they work, and where you think that specific changes should be made to better accommodate whether it's definitions, which policy wonks like me love, or talking about just the nature of risk and really where we should be looking to introduce that critical transparency that record keeping and reporting obligations bring. Down the road, I think that we'll continue to consider where there's other areas where we feel that the virtual currency framework could be optimized. Like we issued a notice at the end of December last year highlighting our intent to propose regulations for virtual currency coverage under the FBAR. So that's something that we'll be continuing to look at. And then on the investigative side, we'll continue focusing on the types of networks that are exploiting virtual currency, including cybercrime groups, ransomware networks, as well as violent extremist groups. So we will continue trying to combat jurisdictional arbitrage as well. So monitoring and registered MSB activity, including when it's headquartered overseas, but is still being conducted wholly or in substantial part in the United States.
Yeah, I definitely want to grab let me come back to a piece of that, what I call like the responsible innovation thing. But Catherine, in terms of OFAC, things you guys have regulations, I know you probably can't talk about any guidance is coming out, and you had the big ransomware last year that, you know, we send to everyone, and we try to push out as much as we can, but anything that you can talk about.
Sure. So I think you wouldn't have an OFAC participant if I couldn't say we can't talk about future sanctions.
Right.
I thought it might be helpful to talk about some of the recent things we've done to help paint a more full picture of how we look at this problem set. And so on the targeting front, in the last couple of years, we've actually had 6 rounds of sanctions related to the illicit use of digital currency. And those have not only been diverse by geography, but also by the activities they've targeted. And so we've hit ransomware perpetrators and facilitators, North Korean state actors, Chinese fentanyl vendors, Russian nationals who are stealing currency from US and foreign victims, Kremlin-linked actors supporting a Russian troll farm, as well as Chinese crypto launderers. So it stretches quite the gambit, and there will probably be more to come on that front. I think one of the more recent actions we've taken was in the enforcement space. In late December, we had our first enforcement action in the virtual currency space, and it was in the form of a settlement with BitGo Inc., which is a California-based tech company that specializes in digital currency wallet services. And as part of the settlement, the company agreed to pay about $99,000 for over 180 apparent violations across multiple sanctions programs from 2015 to 2019. And it was as a part of their deficiencies in their sanctions compliance program. They were allowing persons in blocked jurisdictions, which range from Iran to Syria to Crimea and beyond, to access their services. And so I would say that this action isn't only significant because it's our first one in this space, but also because it helps to remind folks that OFAC sanctions compliance obligations apply to all US persons, including those in the digital currency sector. And so I know we issued this as FinCEN like to issue something during the holiday season. We didn't want to be left out. So we joined the fund. So if you missed that action, we'd encourage you to have a look at our website where we have the full enforcement release that talks about the factors that went into that. And then I think the final thing I would flag is just, as you mentioned, on the guidance front, in the virtual currency space, yes, we have frequently asked questions like we do across most of our programs to make sure we have our public guidance out there. But more recently, and given current events with ransomware, not only increasing in size and scope and often being demanded in the form of digital currency, in October of 2020, OFAC issued an advisory to assist US businesses and individuals with combating ransomware scams and attacks. And at the time, some interpreted our advisory as a change in policy, and I don't think we view it in that way. We saw this as a way to provide guidance on how sanctions that OFAC implements and enforces may have implications for those who are facilitating ransomware payments. And then,
yeah, and oops, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say, for a disclaimer, would be that we're not looking to target the legitimate use of cryptocurrencies, nor are we seeking to hinder innovation. And so we try to keep that very much at the forefront as we look at this problem set.
Yeah, and I think one of the a question kind of came in via chat instead of Q&A about the FAQ about cryptocurrencies, but I think that's on OFAC's webpage, isn't it?
Yep, all of our frequently asked questions will be online.
And the one thing I will say, just to give you guys a shout out, FinCEN and OFAC, I believe, I know FinCEN has an updates list that pretty much anybody can sign up for to get the guidances and alerts, et cetera. And I was shocked when I was at BSA AML conferences, how few people knew about that. And it's such an incredible resource. So just if you're on here and you're not signed up for the OFAC FinCEN updates, it's better than Twitter. So, yeah, definitely. If you take nothing away, get on top of that because you're missing out on an amazing resource. But let me go back because Carol, you mentioned this, and I think it's such a incredible thing. Yes, if some good Samaritan who has access to the chat wants to throw up the FinCEN update sign up, and I'm looking at you, Jen, if you would be willing to do that, that would be incredibly helpful, and we'll just post that in the chat. But going back to what Carol said, you mentioned kind of that you wanted comments, from private industry. Recently there was big news with Janet Yellen and her comments. And one of the things that she, mentioned was the importance of considering the benefits of crypto and digital assets, the potential they have to improve the financial system. And it seems like she is intending to work really closely, not just with, the FBAs and regulators, how to implement an effective framework. And I guess, based on your question, I'd love to hear from you guys. It's clear that we need a functional framework that goes beyond these individual guidances, but what role do you guys see the private sector having in those discussions? And Carol, you had started to talk on that, so I'll just go back to you, and then Catherine would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think all those points that you just mentioned are so critical, right? Innovation is fundamental. It's fundamental to competition. It's a cornerstone of national security and economic might. It's critical to financial inclusion and to efficiency in payments and lots of services. But there's also a need for it to be responsible and to take a look at it from the red hat side and figure out how a lot of the features that make some of these assets very attractive to licit users, which create something that provides some of the, depending on the implementation of it, some of the like anonymity enhancements that cash can, but provides that like instantaneous cross-border transfer of a wire transfer directly into someone's pocket. So looking at the nature of the risks and the activity that's occurring, which varies by implementation. So looking really at technologically what is occurring so that you can take a step back and have this economic lens of fundamentally what is that economic and financial activity that's happening, and figure out where those gaps are, where those points of needing to get critical transparency and visibility are. So I think that industry, not only in creating this innovation, creates an opportunity and a requirement for national security authorities like FinCEN to take a look at the reality of how financial activity is occurring, figure out if the regulatory framework actually works, or if there are these gaps that we need to apply because maybe the regulations weren't written as technology neutral as we wanted them to, and we want to cover this activity where risky features in fact exist. So industry can do proactive engagement. They do that with their creation of innovative technologies. We also see them writing and talking about their innovations and those deliberations. We read all those, all of your articles and think tank pieces, and we also do research and actually mess around with the technology and take a look at what's happening. And then reactive engagement as well. When we ask for feedback and comments, please give it to us. Like I said, I read about 1,000 of the 7,500, but FinCEN read certainly all of them, and we'll continue to read all of them. And we just find that engagement so critical. So yeah, industry is a critical component of those frameworks for regulators, for law enforcement, and for international authorities, even like the Financial Action Task Force.
Yeah, I will say just, and Catherine, I definitely want to hear your thoughts, just to pick something out. I know when I was at DOJ, one of the frustrating things it felt like was a lot of times the voices in industry were kind of like, don't regulate, right? Like it's just like advocating for the anonymous free flow of money. And I remember like having the conversations kind of like that can't be the position, right? And so I think being on the industry sector side and having the conversations of, well, how do we take the goals of the BSA? How do we contribute the technological aspect and map it onto that, right? Like, I think it's very exciting, and I'm so excited to have you guys like in that space and to have those conversations. Catherine, in terms of like, where does OFAC see opportunities to kind of like work with the industry? Is that something that's on your radar?
Yeah, so I think I'd agree with Carol in how much we value hearing from the private sector, and particularly because we recognize that exchanges and others in industry are the ones that are on the front lines, and they're going to be the ones critical to preventing the abuse of cryptocurrency by sanctioned persons and other bad actors. And so we encourage as much engagement as industry is interested in through our hotline, as well as our email feedback account, to both ask us questions and describe some of the challenges you're seeing out there, because this not only helps us determine what type of guidance we might need to be providing on an individual or a more broad base, but also gives us the chance to hear about like the latest breaking issues that industry is facing, and helps educate us a bit more about what's being seen out there.
No, that's awesome. And I think it's changed certainly since Michelle and I started in the crypto space. I think the interaction, FinCEN's incredible innovation hours, like the interactions now with industry seem to be like so much greater. And I think that's a phenomenal trend. Turning to a slightly less happy part is that I think the thing that we all kind of saw, or at least certainly while I was in the government, was the lack of resources that tends to get dedicated to this. I've heard, like now with kind of like a lot of the cyber hacks, it sounds like people are kind of paying attention to the issue. But in terms of resource issues at your agencies, like, I don't want to say is hope on the horizon, but are you guys seeing like movement, discussion? I mean, I know some of you are doing the work of 4 people, and I won't call out which one of you it is, but plans that your agencies might have in terms of resources now that kind of like we're aware of the scope of this, and it's really getting some attention, if you can talk about it. Let's start, Catherine.
Sure. So I would say as digital currency at large has become more widespread, OFAC has also expanded its workforce to meet that challenge. And we kind of approach this as we want to allocate resources to drive additional efforts in this area and tackle some of those more challenging questions, including the ones that come from industry. And I'd say in recent years, the Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Division of Treasury, or TFI, which is where OFAC sits, has received increasing appropriations from Congress. And so as those funds trickle down to the different offices such as OFAC, we've been able to use some of that funding to hire additional folks onto the team. And so that's allowed us to actually dedicate specifically more time to digital currency investigations.
That's awesome. Carol, let's go to you.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you raised that issue because workforce is critical, right? Whether recruiting, training, retaining, upskilling it, absolutely critical in the virtual currency and cyber domains. And in order to maintain a good technology neutral approach, FinCEN has really had to maintain and build substantive technical expertise to sufficiently monitor and stay on top of emerging developments in the space to really understand and see the forest through the trees, right? To more pointedly see the real activity that's happening divorced from or thinking, looking at the technology and understanding that activity that's happening. So this means building and maintaining a workforce across all of our functions, right? Policy, enforcement, intelligence, legal, that has a deep understanding of the financial aspects, the technology aspects, as well as understanding that red hat national security threat aspect. So FinCEN has built a really incredible cross-functional team of experts on cyber and virtual currency. That's why I left OMB to come here. I was so impressed by the team. It was too incredible of a group to turn down working with regularly day in and day out. But we have to continue to grow to meet our mission set and keep pace with the growth of and developing technology in the fintech market. So FinCEN is hiring. We have posted several positions lately.
I was going to say, I've seen some good ones.
Yeah, in policy and enforcement. So please keep an eye out on USA Jobs and have a saved search for opportunities to come work with us. Please do.
Yeah, the time I spent at FinCEN was incredible, and it's being led by two of the greatest guys in the world. So I can't say enough good things. Definitely apply for those jobs. Michelle, what about you? You mentioned the digital currency initiative. Things that you can talk about in terms of expansion, getting more bodies. I know that the FBI OIG report came out that clearly said FBI needs more resources, and you might not be able to talk about DOJ-wide, but anything that you can talk about in terms of additional resources.
I would just echo generally what Carol has previously described, that obviously we're seeing an increase in this. It requires some expertise to do our jobs most effectively. And I think that we will hopefully continue to get the resources that we need. I know we actually just hired another person at the Digital Currency Initiative, which I'm very excited about. And I know that we had a lot of successful seizures and forfeitures this last year, and those will eventually trickle down for all the way from the local police that may have worked on something to salaries, within the DOJ that will support these cases and these investigations that are really important. And I think that there's going to be sufficient attention on the resources that are needed, because what we have seen, at least what I've seen in the last, I would say 18 months or so, is a real increased bleed over of cryptocurrency activity within traditional fraud that we hadn't seen in past years. The ransomware is really prolific. And so I think that those people that are in charge of the purse strings, we're making sure that they're aware of the needs, and we're hopeful that they'll be able to satisfy them.
Yeah, and Carol, you mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to go back to it. You mentioned the Aml Act of 2020, and I know this might not impact OFAC as much, but Carol and Michelle, can you guys talk about the ramifications of that and the impact that it's going to have on your agencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like you mentioned, and like I spoke to earlier, the AML Act is huge for FinCEN and really anybody in the AML space. There's something for everybody in there. So there's several provisions that enshrine initiatives that we're already doing on innovation, regulatory reform, industry engagement, like pilots and the BSAG, the BSA advisory group, and FinCEN Exchange as well. So in the immediate term, it's more like it shows the alignment between FinCEN and Congress on a lot of these efforts. And then second, along some of those lines, a lot of the act really involves working closely with with industry and regulator and law enforcement partners to align our senses of risks and priorities, very much in sync with our advancce notice of proposed rulemaking on AML effectiveness that also went out last year. So aside from that, on some of the long-term impacts, there are some really great aspects of the statute that have some huge long-term impacts. Beneficial ownership is going to be big. And like I mentioned, I work in identity. That's so big, right? So
yeah, everybody's stoked about the UBO stuff. I mean, I think that's hugely exciting.
It has so many implications, right? From there's regulatory actions in there. There's like technological issues. There's an identity service that we provide for law enforcement and financial institutions in there. There's just a lot to be looked at, and also to be leveraged from industry and from other agencies that have experience in looking at identity issues. So a lot of the inherent requirements there really require some of this engagement that we want and are seeking input on. So aside from beneficial ownership, we'll be looking to align AML priorities across all of our stakeholders, and placing foreign and domestic liaisons across the United States and around the globe. Like, very exciting work. So, and then finally, since it kind of caveats onto the resources question that you just had, we are looking forward to the Special Hiring Authority to speed the sometimes challenging process to bring in incredibly talented people who want to join the FinCEN mission.
You're the only person who can get that excited about the BSA AML. It's one of the reasons we all love you. It's like only Carol House can make BSA AML just something that literally everybody beams about. Michelle, what about you in terms of the AML Act? Anything hitting DOJ?
Well, all of the things that Carol was talking about, at least from the beneficial ownership perspective, the additional information that eventually will make their way to our investigators and prosecutors. But on the virtual currency front, what was good about this particular act is the broadening and codification of convertible virtual currency as value that substitutes for currency, actually now in Title 31 of the United States Code. So previously we've had prosecutions related to Title 31 where we were primarily relying on guidance and the Code of Federal Regulation definitions, but now we actually have that same language, the value that substitutes for currency, as included in Title 31 of the United States Code for us. And so I think that that's going to give us a stronger ground for some of our money laundering and Bank Secrecy Act prosecutions.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the chats, there's so many people that are watching that are located in countries outside of the United States. And it's actually like incredible. It's a horrible side effect of the pandemic that we're doing this virtually so everybody can be here. But I think a lot of those folks are watching the US and other countries who are working in this space. Can you guys talk about whether your agencies are looking at other countries or working with other countries to kind of collaborate on those regulatory frameworks? Catherine, let's start with you if there's anything you can talk about.
Sure. So I would say off the bat is we actually have a sister office, the Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes Office, that is primarily tasked with these foreign engagements. But specific to the sanction side of the house, I'd say that sanctions are going to be more effective when they're coordinated with our partners and our allies. And we are always looking for more ways to take joint actions with some of our close partners, including the EU, Canada, as well as the UK, now that they've split off from the EU. And this, I think, is in the virtual currency space, there's definitely more potential as some of those countries also stand up their own cyber programs in the sanctions realm. So we look forward to the opportunities ahead on that front.
Carol, how about you guys? I know FinCEN does a pretty good job, but I'd love to hear kind of like in terms of crypto cooperation, what are you guys seeing in terms of global activity?
Absolutely. We work with our international partners all the time and love doing so. So we participate in the U.S. delegation to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. I'm actually going to let Michelle speak to that because she is also so deeply involved in that wonderful effort with international partners. But Egmont, the Egmont Group of Financial Intelligence Units, or FIUs, is also really critical for us. Over 160 FIUs internationally that we get to work with and share information with to be able to support investigations involving illicit finance, including involving virtual currency activity. We also are participating in an FIU symposium, which previously was the Heads of FATF FIU Forum, where we've consistently worked on virtual currency issues across FIU leadership, looking at best practices involving virtual currency investigations. We also have a lot of bilateral relationships, whether it's in supervision, supporting investigations, or working with regulatory partners, doing training to provide either technical assistance as they're drafting their own frameworks, understanding theirs to better inform ours. So there's just tons of partnership with our international colleagues.
And Michelle, I know you've been really busy with FATF, so would love to kind of hear your kind of international efforts.
Yeah, separate from FATF, which I'll touch on a little bit, even within the Department of Justice, we actually are regularly interacting with our foreign partners, both in a collaborative capacity when we're working on these cases that are often multi-jurisdictional with our fellow investigators in the other countries, but also with the other central authorities as far as them needing things that we have here in the States, and then us needing things maybe that are at companies or financial institutions in their countries. And so, to add to the Women in Crypto event, two of the most active kind of crypto savvy women in the DOJ are at the Office of International Affairs, and on a regular basis we're interacting with our foreign partners in order to have evidence and assets going in both directions. We also have our Office of let me say this right. It's the Office of Prosecutorial Assistance, Development and Training. And it is a joint venture.
You can just say OPDAT. Everybody calls it OPDAT.
Yeah. Know what I'm saying when I say OPDAT. And it's a great network of experienced attorneys who are set up as resident legal advisors all over the globe. And I know that they have been doing, it's a joint venture with the State Departments in those particular jurisdictions. And I know that in recent years, they have been doing increased trainings and information sharing with our prosecutor investigator counterparts, sometimes also the regulators in those jurisdictions, to try to help increase their capacity and share notes about cryptocurrency techniques, tools for our particular portfolios. And we also funded a full-time position, which is a global cryptocurrency ICHIP coordinator. And this individual is responsible for basically coordinating those cryptocurrency type programs through OPDAT, as I've mentioned. So we're regularly interacting with our partners in that capacity, as well as with the Financial Action Task Force, providing information that can help those different committees to figure out how they want to develop the recommendations and the guidance, both for the policy development group, where they're actually creating the guidance and the actual recommendations, but also in the risk groups, where after you've got the program set up for the virtual asset service providers, you know, how do you actually supervise these particular service providers? What types of things should investigators be looking for? How do we conduct seizures, et cetera? And we've worked with our partners to compare the different techniques that we use that are sometimes different because we have different legal systems, different constitutional restrictions as to how we handle both seizures, investigations, et cetera. But it's very, I think, helpful for everyone for us to talk about what works in our respective jurisdictions, how we've set up our statutory regimes and our supervision practices, not only so that we can all learn from each other as to what's working in this evolving area, but also for those maybe smaller or jurisdictions that maybe are just starting to ramp up their both their statutes that may cover criminal activity, but also their regulatory regimes. What has worked for the U.S. and for some of the other jurisdictions that have been in it for a while, and what can they maybe copy.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. Crypto is so new that even just like a couple of years ago, working with some major jurisdictions that still just haven't encountered issues or made policies where our interactions with them were shaping what they decided to do. And it still felt a little bit like the Wild Wild West in both a great and terrifying way. So depending on the day and where you were at. But so this will be the last question, because we have a ton of questions and I got approval to run over, because when I saw how many questions, I was like, oh my gosh, everybody wants to talk with you guys. So this is the last question from me, and then we'll turn to the other questions. But it is a Women in Crypto event, so I definitely want to ask this. I know we've all been kind of like around in this space for a while, but what has it been like for you as a woman in this space? Have you seen changes since you got into it, positive, negative, what's that experience been, or what have you seen, noticed, thoughts, comments? Just curious. Let's see.
It's been great. I mean, I have to say that I've done a number of different things throughout my career, and I think I'm surrounded by more women in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space than I have in my entire career, and that has been, I think, really, really interesting. And it's across government in technical positions. We've got, across the country, prosecutors and U.S. attorneys' offices that are, a lot of the women are the leaders and the subject matter experts. I think my cohorts over at the computer crime and intellectual property section in the criminal division, Alden and Louisa and Jessica, 3 women who are experts related to cryptocurrency prosecutions. So it's been great, I would say, to be surrounded by so many both accomplished and as well excited about the technology and the creativity that you really have to use when you're working in this space.
Yeah, I'm just gonna completely echo that and say that first off, starting on this panel, including Amanda, we miss you on the government side. It's cool. I'll get over it. These are some of the most incredible people that I've gotten to work with on the government side. Just incredibly brilliant and innovative and thought leadership full women. And I see it at FinCEN. And honestly, especially, I know that it's present on the investigative side too, but since I'm the policy wonk, on the policy and legal side, I just see women kind of owning crypto, especially on the government front, in a really wonderful way across agencies, whether it's the IRS or all the different components of Treasury that are looking at virtual currency, because there's a lot that I'll look at it from different perspectives. There's always women in the room, and that's just a really wonderful thing to see, because that certainly wasn't always the reality, and I don't think always is, and including in hard cyber as well. But it is something where I think that diversity generally in that particular aspect of diversity is continuing to grow, and it's just really encouraging to see.
And I would say,
yeah,
the most gender balanced places I've ever worked, and even within the virtual currency portfolio, we have additional targeters as well as folks in our compliance office that are women, and I think we always welcome the opportunity to bring on more of them, because who can have enough women?
Well, hopefully people will stick around and join us in the Gather Town networking. You should have received a link to that, so I'll touch on that in a moment. But someday, if we all get back to real life, the hope is for this to become a conference in person where we all have those opportunities. I do think there's a ton of women in government. It seems like that's where a lot, now that I'm in the private sector, on the infrastructure side, it seems like those voices are kind of harder to get raised above so that's part of the hope of the Women in Crypto series. So anybody out there who's watching, if you have ideas for topics or speakers, please don't hesitate to connect with me on LinkedIn, send us a message. But I do want to try to get to some of the questions, because there's a lot of them and they are fantastic. We're definitely not going to be able to get to all of them. I'm hoping this might be an easy one. Catherine, are OFAC applications for ransomware payments available via FOIA? I don't. None of us are FOIA experts, so I definitely can't answer that one.
Sorry, so it's. Could you say it again? I'm sorry.
Are OFAC applications for ransomware payments available via FOIA?
I assume that must relate to licensing submissions, but I think those, when they come from a private sector, are usually exempt, but I am not a FOIA expert, so I don't want to venture too far down that path.
So here's a question for Michelle. How can public-private initiatives best build on the Scotiabank/Project Shadow Drive?
I am not familiar with that.
Some of these are really specific and I feel so bad. It feels like a pop quiz.
But it sounds interesting. So reach out to me on LinkedIn and maybe we can have a discussion about it offline.
Here's a good one. I have found that there are much more prosecutions related to the illicit use of cryptocurrency in the USA than in the European Union. How can we explain that? I will take a stab and say math because there's so many more bodies. But do you guys have any thoughts? I know we work really closely. Like there's been some really great ones coming out of Germany, the Netherlands, but you guys, I would love your thoughts in terms of an answer to that beyond just math.
Yeah, I'm going to level set on just availability of information. Obviously, we don't prosecute, so that's going to be all Michelle. But I'll just say that because I'll emphasize the importance of a regulatory framework that increases visibility of these transactions. Because we've regulated this activity for so long, there have been requirements for certain records to be kept and information to be transmitted between financial institutions and kept in records on hand, and suspicious activity reporting to come to FinCEN. So we've had visibility. I think that BSA framework being in place for so long that applies to this activity has helped to provide law enforcement and FinCEN and other authorities some of that critical transparency to identify those illicit networks. And now I'll turn over to the actual prosecutor, Michelle.
I think Amanda's right that it's mostly a numbers game, but what I will say is that so many of our investigations and prosecutions, if you followed the press releases, have a component where we are actually working with our foreign counterparts because these cases are so multi-jurisdictional, and you know, it may be just because of resources. It could be because if you're looking at you know, a bunch of people that are working on something together, that they may look at this and say, where do we think that we're going to get the most desired effect at the end of the day? And so maybe the statutes and some of the criminal justice tools that we have here in the United States may be the choice of some of the other jurisdictions that we may be working with, if there's a choice about where the case could land. But I think it's probably just math, because I will tell you, they are really, you know, working very, very hard. There are some super smart people in the EU and in the UK. You know, they know what they're doing, and there's certainly plenty of activity over there. I think it's just that, you know, we have so much more population activity, et cetera, here in the States, that's maybe why it looks like there's more activity here.
I will also say, like, the viewpoint that I've had on the private sector is that there's also a even greater resources issue from what I've seen, especially in Europe and in the EU. It's so bad that, like, well, not so bad, but it got to the point where the UK has actually outsourced its asset recovery in this fascinating system where private attorneys assist victims in addition to law enforcement. So they've adapted the system, but there really is a huge resource issue in some of those countries where, you know, you only have 1 or 2 investigators per law enforcement agency that does crypto, right? Like tiny numbers of folks who are familiar, and trying to do that capacity building is something that I think a lot of us are looking at, including state and opt-out. So it was a really good point. But Michelle and Carol, you guys touched on this, and one of the questions actually asked it, and I think it's a really good one. How important will international cooperation and universal policy development be in this space? Or rather, how realistic is this, given the diverse regulatory environments around the globe? Are your respective institutions doing anything to reach out or advocate for cohesive international policy development in crypto?
I don't think it's ever going to be universal, because we're just culturally too different. Our legal systems are too different. Our views on privacy and national security and everything in between is very different. But I think that international cooperation is going to increase, and it has to. And I feel very positive given my work with the FATF, and I know that there are a lot of other international organizations that are doing excellent work to try to cooperatively make it so that there aren't these holes that people are taking advantage of. And that's really, I mean, I think it's a matter of having a system where we're all collecting generally the same types of information that we need to do our jobs and keep our citizens safe, to keep the financial system that this is operating in safe, and also to be able to recover assets for victims, because a lot of the crime that we're seeing is, you know, fraud, hacking, ransomware, and the victims are across jurisdictions. And so everybody, I think, has a very important interest in making sure that we can work together in a timely and efficient manner.
Yeah, it really underscores why when the US had the presidency of the FATF, it was such a critical priority to get those standards developed, adopted, now still looking at implementation and looking at whether there should be updates to guidance, and that stuff like that many of us continue to be engaged with consistently, because even if jurisdictional authorities want to be helpful, even if a virtual asset service provider in a jurisdiction wants to be helpful in following a financial trail, if there was no record to be required to be kept in the first place, they don't know who to go to. Like, they can't even point authorities if they want to be helpful to the right place. So those regulatory frameworks are critical. I do agree that, like, I mean, no financial framework is the same. Recommendation 1 of the FATF standards is risk-based approach. So every jurisdiction is going to look different. Definitions are going to be different everywhere, but it is really critical for every jurisdiction to properly regulate financial activity where it's occurring, and where those critical money laundering and terrorism financing risks exist.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we're the jurisdictional arbitrage that will result if we don't do that, I think, is clear. And I think FATF trying to set like a floor, right? Basically, like you should be above this. I think great things are happening there. I want to ask a question because I get it all the time. And Catherine, this one is for you. Are companies required to apply to OFAC if they are considering paying ransom to unlock files locked by ransomware?
So I would say I would encourage you to have a look at our ransomware advisory, because it goes into some of the potential sanctions risk. Every ransomware incident isn't necessarily going to have a sanctions nexus, but if you have reason to believe that there might be, it's definitely worth looking at our advisory and potentially applying through our licensing portal, but also making sure you're reporting to the appropriate law enforcement folks as well. And that could include multiple areas within Treasury, within DOJ, and beyond.
And here's an interesting one. It was kind of mentioned in the DOJ crypto framework. So it's thoughts on privacy coins. Seeing exchanges delist, do you see this as generalized concerns regarding the ability to comply with AML KYC, or do you believe part of the concern is increasing regulatory scrutiny?
Well, the DOJ, we're not regulators. So what I would say is that's a question that you have to ask each individual company that may be making decisions about what their comfort level is with their risk.
Yeah, I agree there that it's probably like, I mean, risk can include like potential regulatory risk and liability. So I think that there's just a lot of questions out there right now, even for more transparent assets, but also for anonymity enhanced cryptocurrencies. Like, where are those risk mitigations? Like, where are the things that help to ensure some of that critical transparency when it's necessary, and how are you fulfilling those due diligence obligations? So I think that really it is an institution individual facts and circumstances and risk-based approach. But as the sector continues to focus on compliance solutions and how some of the really innovative technologies that are out there in the world might be able to help support, use of privacy enhancing technologies, but that can also provide that critical transparency upon, proof of due process or need for it to appropriate authorities, including financial institutions. So I think that as industry really continues to focus on its innovative efforts and focusing on developing compliance solutions, there's a lot of opportunities to help highlight where there might be able to be risk mitigating measures put in place to make people more comfortable with any kind of asset or operation.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? Is that some of them have the ability to like toggle privacy on or off and some of them don't, right? And we have to be able to have the conversation of where does the interest of privacy stop and where do we have to not have the anonymous free flow of money? And we have to be able to have context and like a fulsome discussion surrounding that. I'm just gonna, I know we're running a little bit over, but there's, I selfishly, I wanna ask this question because I think I know the answer. You can certainly give it to us, but outside of blockchain analytics companies, is there a data repository where the information we collect on attacks and our analysis can be shared to empower a global intelligence and evidence collection? I guess I was thinking kind of like IC3 maybe, like because I know all the blockchain analytics companies will gobble it up. We'll take whatever data you'll give us. I mean, good data, like I'm half joking, but like in terms of kind of like reporting, I guess I was kind of thinking, I think IC3 has a function, right, where they kind of collect analysis. I just was trying to think of whether you guys collect that data.
Suspicious activity reporting, definitely. We love it.
If only there was a repository of suspicious activity reports.
Yes. Yeah. So financial institutions, there is a vehicle to provide reporting.
Right. This is if you're not a financial institution with a SAR filing obligation, right?
Yeah. I guess, and it depends on the kind of thing that you're looking for, right? Like, for example, if you're trying to share cyber indicators, DHS and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is a great place to go. And there's a lot of entities like information sharing and analysis centers that help facilitate sharing of cyber indicators in an automated way, or even just on other distros. So that can be very helpful, says the resident cyber nerd. But for other stuff, I'm sure like commercial tools, there's groups and associations around 314B, which is a safe harbor under FinCEN regulation and under the Patriot Act that allows for financial institutions and associations of financial institutions to share information to support the detection and reporting of money laundering and terrorism financing activities. So we just updated that fact sheet in December. So please take a look at our website for some updated clarifications that we offer to that safe harbor. But those industry administered databases would not be run by the government. But there are agencies that like law enforcement reporting, like IC3 that you mentioned. Of course, cyber indicators. And then FinCEN also shares cyber indicators that we have back out with the sector as well through our secure information sharing system.
So I don't, go ahead.
Some industry groups that actually have repository of this type of information, particularly in the human trafficking space. And I wish that I knew off the top of my head, I cannot remember. There's a couple of organizations that out there that actually collect quite a bit of information that's helpful to human trafficking.
I feel like it's called the Human Trafficking Initiative or the Anti-Human Trafficking,
different.
All I know is that if you reach out, if you connect with Teresa Forbes on LinkedIn, who I consider the goddess of human trafficking at Treasury, okay, or Jane Khodorkovsky at DOJ, I'm going to shout out the two most fabulous women at human trafficking in the government, okay? If you connect with them on LinkedIn, if there's any questions that you have about human trafficking, these are the two women who live their lives committed to fighting it. And if you don't know their names, I promise you're not doing what you should be doing in human trafficking if you're dealing with the government. There's a lot of good resources. Thank you to everyone who threw links in the chats and shared information. Like, this was so fantastic. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. The names for the human trafficking ladies are Teresa Forbes at TFI, Carol, TFI?
Yeah, she's at TFFC, which is an office under TFI Treasury.
and I'm not going to butcher Jane's last name, but Jane Khodorkovsky, or Jane K, as we call her at DOJ. If you're interested in reaching out to her, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll put you in touch. Oh, somebody threw the spelling in there. Thank you. You guys are fabulous. I will just say there's also some information in the chat that Molly threw in there. But Carol, Catherine, Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with such incredibly impressive women who will literally be paving the way for crypto's future in regulation and enforcement. I can't tell you how much we all, especially myself, really appreciate your time and insights. I hope all of you out there in virtual land will join the four of us for a virtual happy hour immediately following this session. There should have been a GatherTown link in your event invite. I think Molly also threw it in the chat. You are going to love this. Basically, they have gamified networking. And it's a fantastically fun thing. You come, you select an avatar, you walk around the space, and you can bump into people. Michelle will tell you we've done one. They are hilariously fun and funny. So to the extent that you think virtual networking is not for you, I highly encourage coming. We'll have the recording sent out via email this week for those of you who are unable to attend live. And we'll also be announcing additional sessions soon for women in crypto. But again, if you have speakers, topics, please don't hesitate to email us or reach out to me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much. We could see all of you out there, your comments, your thoughts, your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but come see us in the happy hour and we will do our best. So click on the GatherTown link and we will see you soon. Ladies, I miss you all, and it's just fabulous to see you even virtually. So thank you so much for your time.